Hi, I'm Tanya White. Today I want to speak about Parshat shelach Lecha, and I want to talk about the idea of falling in love again with the land. What does that mean? For several years before October the 7th, I was speaking about this a lot to my students. I felt as if we had, in some senses, fallen out of love with our people, with our land. Fascinatingly enough, the Israeli pop singer who's very well known here in Israel, Hanan Ben Ari, seemed to imply this in his song, which he released a few months before October the 7th, called Chutz Mikadoregel, apart from football, in which he speaks about the idea of him not getting passionate or excited about anything other than football. Speaking, he says, talking about whoever it is, he's talking about you still get excited by the sea, whereas I don't get excited by anything by football. And in some senses, I saw that as a cultural commentary on us, on the people, on what does it mean to be a people in our land. In a sense, after 75 years, there's a sense of routine, there's a sense of boredom. It engenders a sense of apathy. There's a kind of feeling, a sentiment that, okay, this is a given now. But on October the 8th, Jews once again fell in love with their people and their land, for all the tragedy and all the pain and all the sorrow and all the suffering that we experienced. We saw Jews from globally, all over, not just in Israel, suddenly affirming their Jewish identity, feeling that they belonged to their people, feeling the pain of their brothers and their sisters. That passion that we'd lost was rekindled. And in a way, we were awoken from this slumber that had taken over and assumed once again our inheritance. We underwent this kind of near-death experience which exposed our fragility. We adjusted our lenses and we saw a reality in a different light. If Parashat's a book about the road to character for the individual and the family, then Bamidbar is a book about the road to the growth of the nation. As the nation progresses, and we've seen it in the last few Parshiot, from moans and cries to speech and thoughtful eloquence, a nation that goes from looking backwards, we want to go back to Mitzrayim, to looking forward, we want to go to Eretz Yisrael, from despair and to hope. And they transform. The first generation sees themselves as grasshoppers. That's what we see in this week's Parsha. And eventually they see themselves as fighters ready to enter the land and fight for their national destiny. But every transformation is paved with loss and pain. And to grow up requires to be able to integrate that loss, to be able to integrate the sacrifices. It's a process of maturation, and it involves breaking out of old modalities and adopting new ones. It involves facing adversity, building resilience, learning to look at reality and interpret that reality without illusions, but also with a dose of optimism, pragmatic optimism that engenders meaning and agency. The story of the spies is a story about failure. It's a failure of the princes, of the tribes, whose low self-esteem and self-worth colors the report that they bring back of the land. It's about the failure of the people who hear the report and are not mature enough in a way to question its veracity, and instead resort to some form of temper tantrum where they go and sulk in their rooms or read their tents. But it's also the failure of leaders whose unwavering belief in the capacity for a quick and painless transformation from a slave nation to a fighting one was probably too optimistic at the best, if we're looking at it at the best, and maybe even delusional at the worst. So there's many inconsistencies that we see in this story. And one of them actually is the account, the narrative of the account that we see in Sefer Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, and Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy. In Sefer Bamidbar, Moshe recounts, the story is recounted from the perspective of the Torah. In Sefer Dvarim, it's recounted from the perspective of Moshe. One of the inconsistencies is related to the purpose of the mission. There's two words that the text invokes throughout the narratives. One of them is liragel, which literally means to spy, and that's where the word meraglim comes from. It's a reconnaissance mission. And the other is lator, which is something more akin to touring or being a tourist. One's about fact-finding to win a battle, and the other's about forming an impression of the land. One's objective, the other's subjective. One is pragmatic, information we need, and the other is more fanciful, more romantic. One asks you to look at the weaknesses of the land so that you know what you're going to fight, and the other is asking you to look at the strengths. What impression, what beauty, what do you see? There's a book that I read recently called Curious. There, the author Ian Leslie describes two ways people ask questions about the world, and he calls them puzzles and mysteries. The first way, like a puzzle, is something that needs to be solved. It commands our curiosity until we've deciphered it. A mystery, by contrast, never stops inviting inquiry. It can become a journey that constantly piques our curiosity and leads us to unknown alleys. He invites us to think about the way we approach problems and questions. Okay, and he says that when we come across a puzzle, we should always be alert, even though we want to find the solution, we want to find the answer, we should always be alert to the mystery that lies behind it, because the mystery is what will occupy us and entertain us and keep us curious long after the puzzle has been solved. What I want to suggest is that the two words used by the Torah and used by Moshe that to describe the narrative of the spies can be categorized using Ian Leslie's categorizations as a puzzle and a mystery. When the people are asked to go and liragel, to spy the land, that demands an answer to a question, like a puzzle, right? We have an objective that's practical and we need to find an answer. We want to fight a battle. We need battle plans. We want to win a war. We need intelligence. We need to know where the weakness of the land is so that we know how to fight the enemy. But the word lator suggests a very different kind of mission. It demands a perspective that addresses the mystery rather than the puzzle. It's got a romantic air to its report. It's like a tourist who goes to tour a country and is required to, in a sense, fall in love with the country, look at its mystery, look at its vibe. This report would not provide final answers or an objective account of how we need to go and fight the land, but rather engenders a sense of awe, a sense of wonder. It's what we need when we are journeying through undiscovered territory. We need to see the world anew. We need to be radically amazed, as Rabbi Avraham Yeshua Heschel describes. Maybe it was the inability of the spies and the people to differentiate between these two missions, these two objectives, and to detect the nuance between them that showed they weren't prepared and ready to go into the land. Part of the maturation process of any human being is the ability to know when a situation requires or demands practical objective data and when it requires nuanced subjective interpretation. Knowing when to apply the certainty of answers and rules that are goal-oriented, and when instead to engage in curiosity, exploration, uncertain turns, pursuit of the journey rather than destination. Knowing when to see the destination and knowing when to appreciate the flowers and the scenery along the path. The wilderness generation were slaves. They couldn't live, as we've already mentioned in the past, with ambivalence or with nuance. They were goal-oriented, rule-regulated, fenced in by the boundaries. And therefore, it's no surprise that when they told and directed to go spy or look at the land, go and find the land, search the land, they really only kept to the goal-oriented matrix. They went to the land, even though they were meant to go on a fact-finding mission and a romantic kind of exploratory mission. What they really went and ended up doing was only the fact-finding mission. Why? They already doubted their own capabilities. They were already drowning in the fear and the anxiety at the prospect of becoming people that would have to go and fight for their own destiny, for their own land. Therefore, it's only natural in a way that they spiraled into this cognitive distortion. The land wasn't any more good, as God had described it, but instead bad. They went into binary thinking. Everything was bad. This type of binary thinking, where everything is bad, can only be seen through the lens of a puzzle to be solved rather than a mystery to experience, and therefore naturally leads to the conclusion, lo nuchal la'alot. If we're looking only at facts, the facts are, we can't conquer the land. But if we are looking at more than facts, if we are able to impose an interpretive lens that isn't distorted by our previous preconceptions, by our previous cognitive gleanings, if we are able to see something, to have a vision of something that it isn't based necessarily only on data, something else happens. When we as a nation have lived in this land, and at every stage of our national history, it has required us to live with this sense of ambivalence, to look at the land, to look at ourselves, both in the mode of liragel and lator. We have to be aware of our weaknesses and the practical implications of being surrounded by enemies, internal and external, but we equally have to fall in love with the land and its inhabitants every day anew. We have to nurture our curiosity. We have to romantically walk the streets of our ancestors. We have to be amazed and awed by the resilience and the growth of this nation and what we've achieved by the help of God in 75 years. How we have turned ashes into an old new land once again. And this, at the same time, we have to be aware of our limitations. We have to be aware of the information. We have to be aware of our enemies. This dialectical mindset requires profound maturity that demands living between two sometimes contradictory realities and embracing them both. That, I believe, is the secret to our survival in Eretz Yisrael. And without it, we will be forever destined to remain in the wilderness. Can we hold the romantic gesture, the romantic interpretive scheme of the way in which we fall in love with our land and our people every single day, together with the reality on the ground, the data that's in front of us, the enemies that surround us, and know how to fight them? Can we do both? Shabbat Shalom.